The first cries of the newborn pierced the silence of dawn, sending ripples through the village of Mji Wambinguni. The night had been long, the labor difficult. Inside the dimly lit hut, the scent of burning herbs mixed with the thick humidity of the early morning. Sweat glistened on Abony's forehead as she gasped for breath, her exhausted body trembling from the effort. Around her, women murmured prayers, their voices hushed yet filled with urgency. But when the child finally emerged, the prayers stopped. A collective gasp filled the air. The midwives froze, their hands hovering over the newborn as if afraid to touch him. Even Naya, the most experienced healer in the village, the woman who had delivered countless babies in her lifetime, felt her throat tighten with disbelief. There, in her arms, lay a child unlike any other. His skin, soft and warm, bore the deep, rich tones of the land itself, but from his back, where only smooth flesh should have been, sprouted two delicate wings, dark as the shadows cast by the ancient baobabs. The feathers, fine as silk, glistened faintly in the dim light, shifting slightly as if sensing the weight of the world around them. Abony, weak but filled with the boundless love only a mother could understand, stretched out her arms. "Let me see my son," she whispered. Naya hesitated, her hands tightening around the baby for just a moment. A silent question flickered in her aged eyes, a question none of the women dared to voice. Was this child a blessing from the spirits, or a warning? Outside, the first rays of sunlight kissed the village, bringing with them the early stirrings of life. Roosters crowed, goats bleated softly as herders prepared for the day. But then, the silence within the hut seeped outward like an unspoken omen. One by one, figures emerged from the shadows, whispering among themselves, their voices trembling between awe and fear. "A child with wings?" a woman murmured, clutching her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "The gods have sent us a sign." "Or a punishment," another voice countered. The whispers spread like wildfire, winding through the village like an invisible storm. Some spoke in reverence, others in doubt. Superstitions ran deep in Mji Wambinguni. It was a land where omens were carved into the very soil, where the flight of birds and the shifting winds foretold the balance between fortune and misfortune. A child born with wings. This was beyond comprehension. Inside the hut, Abony cradled her son, her fingers tracing the delicate curve of his tiny face. He was perfect, just as she had imagined in the quiet moments before his birth. But now, a shadow of unease crept into her heart. Would the village accept him? Would they see the same beauty she did? Jabari, the boy's father, entered the hut, his presence strong and steady. His eyes, however, betrayed his turmoil. He was a hunter, a man of reason, not one to be swayed by whispers in the wind. But as his gaze fell upon the child in Abony's arms, he inhaled sharply. "Wings," he murmured. He had seen many things in his years, faced dangers beyond the village's borders, but nothing had ever struck him with such raw disbelief. Naya, still kneeling, finally found her voice. "What name shall he be given?" she asked, though the words felt heavier than they should. Names had power. Names shaped destinies. And this child's destiny would not be ordinary. Abony, despite her exhaustion, lifted her chin. "Mosi," she declared softly, "for he is the first." A hush fell over the room. The name carried weight, an acknowledgement of what could not be denied. This child was different. He was the first of his kind. Outside, the village elders gathered beneath the ancient tree at the heart of Mji Wambinguni. Their faces were lined with wisdom, their eyes heavy with thoughts unspoken. The news had reached them swiftly, and with it, the burden of decision. "Such things are not natural," one of the elders muttered, gripping his walking staff. "This has never happened before." "But the spirits do not act without reason," another countered. "Perhaps the child has a purpose." The debate swirled like dust in the wind. Some believed Mosi was a gift, sent to bring fortune upon the village. Others feared the opposite, that his existence would disrupt the balance, invite misfortune upon their people. And then there were those who remained silent, watching, waiting, knowing that time itself would reveal the truth. Night fell upon Wombingoni, but the village did not sleep easily. The air was thick with uncertainty, the kind that weighed heavy on the soul. Inside her hut, Ebony lay awake, her son nestled against her chest. She listened to the rustling of the wind through the trees, to the distant howls of creatures in the night. But most of all, she listened to the steady, rhythmic breathing of the child in her arms. No matter what the village believed, no matter what the future held, she knew one thing with certainty. Her son was not a curse. He was a miracle, and miracles were never meant to be hidden. Mosi had always known he was different. From the moment he took his first steps, his mother's gentle hands would pull a woven cloth tightly around his back, hiding the truth that made him unlike the other children. His wings, once delicate and small, had begun to grow, thickening with dark, sleek feathers, their weight pressing against him like an unspoken burden. Every morning, before the sun had fully awakened the land, his father, Jabari, would kneel before him, tightening the wrap around his shoulders. "You must never let them see." Jabari's voice was steady, but the concern in his eyes betrayed his fear. The world does not understand what it fears, and fear can be dangerous. Mosi nodded, but his heart ached. He longed to run freely like the others, to chase the wind across the golden fields, to climb the tallest trees and feel the air rush against his skin. But while the other boys removed their shirts under the blistering sun, Mosi kept his coverings tight, bearing the heat in silence. The cloth itched, the weight of it stifling, but the weight of secrecy was heavier. At dusk, when the sky melted into warm hues of orange and violet, the village boys would gather near the great baobab tree. Obesai and Tun were always the first to challenge one another, daring each other to climb higher, to jump farther. The others cheered, laughing as they leaped from branch to branch like mischievous monkeys. Mosi watched from the ground, his hands clenched into fists. He could have outdone them all. He could have soared. One evening, as the river glistened under the last light of day, Mosi stood near the water's edge, watching the boys wrestle in the grass. Obesai's sharp eyes landed on him, his lips curling into a smirk. "Why do you always just stand there, Mosi?" Obesai stepped closer, his tone mocking. "Are you afraid?" Mosi stiffened, but said nothing. Tun chuckled, shaking his head. "Maybe he's just weak," he teased, his voice dripping with amusement. Like a baby bird too scared to leave the nest. The words stung deeper than they should have. Weak. The accusation burned in his chest, igniting something he had kept buried for too long. His hands trembled at his sides. "Say something," Obesai challenged, stepping forward. When Mosi still didn't respond, Obesai shoved him. It wasn't a hard push, but it was enough to send him stumbling back. Mosi's breath caught. He felt his balance waver. For a split second, his instincts betrayed him. His wings twitched beneath the cloth, ready to spread, to catch him before he fell. "No!" He forced him still. His back hit the ground, dust rising around him. The other boys laughed, their voices mixing with the evening wind. Shame twisted inside him, hot and suffocating. Obesai leaned over him, his dark eyes narrowing. "You're hiding something," he muttered. "I can feel it." Mosi's heartbeat thundered in his ears. He wanted to tell them, to rip away the cloth and show them what he really was. To prove that he wasn't weak, that he could do more than any of them ever dreamed. But he couldn't. His father's words were chains around his soul. The world does not understand what it fears. That night, as he lay beneath the thatched roof of his family's hut, he stared at the wooden beams above him. His mother's soft breathing filled the space, her presence always a comfort, but it did little to ease the war raging inside him. His father's voice echoed in his mind. His friend's laughter haunted him. His wings twitched beneath the covers. A longing stirred in his chest, one that grew stronger with each passing day. A need to break free, to feel the wind carry him, to embrace the gift that had been hidden for so long. But if he did, would he still belong? The village of Mji, Wambinguni, was bathed in silver light, the moon standing high above the endless plains. The sounds of the night were alive, crickets humming in the grass, distant howls of hyenas echoing across the savannah, and the rustling of leaves as a gentle breeze wove through the trees. But Mosi was not in his hut. His heart pounded as he stood before the sacred baobab, the oldest and tallest tree in the village, its thick, gnarled roots gripping the earth like the hands of time itself. He had heard stories of this tree since he was a child. The elders said its branches whispered to the spirits, that its roots stretched deep into the past. No one climbed it, not out of fear, but out of reverence. Yet tonight something called to him, a pull deep in his chest, stronger than any fear, stronger than any warning his father had ever given him. The wind stirred the leaves above, as if beckoning him forward. His hands found the rough bark, his fingers curling into the grooves worn by centuries of rain and sun. With one deep breath, he began to climb, higher and higher, his arms pulling him up, his feet pressing against the sturdy trunk. His heart raced, not from exhaustion, but from something else. Anticipation. The world below shrank as he climbed. The village huts became small, their fires flickering like stars scattered across the land. The river, glistening in the moonlight, stretched like a silver snake through the fields. The sky above felt closer, vast and endless, waiting. Mosi reached the highest branch that could hold his weight. He crouched there, his breath shallow, his body trembling. He had imagined this moment 1,000 times, had dreamed of it in restless nights, but now that he was here, doubt crept into his mind. Was this foolish? Would he fall? His fingers tightened around the branch. His wings, hidden for so long, itched beneath his cloth wraps, as if they too longed for freedom. Then he jumped. For a heartbeat, fear took hold of him. The ground rushed toward him, the air pressing against his skin. But then, his wings unfurled. The fabric binding them ripped apart as the wind caught beneath the feathers. He felt it, a force unlike anything he had ever known. His body lifted. He was not falling, he was flying. The world transformed before his eyes. The rolling plains stretched endlessly, golden even beneath the moon's glow. The river sparkled, weaving through the land like the path of an ancient spirit. The village, the very place he had spent his life hiding, looked so small now, so fragile, so insignificant from up here. For the first time in his life, he felt right, like he had always belonged to the sky, as if the air itself had been waiting for him. He tilted his wings, feeling how they responded to his movements, how each feather caught the wind. He soared higher, the cool night air brushing against his skin. A laugh bubbled in his chest, one of pure joy. The weight he had carried for so long, the burden of secrecy, the fear of being different, it all melted away in the vast embrace of the sky. This was who he was meant to be. But then, as he descended, something changed. The joy twisted into a sharp pulse of fear. Because at the base of the tree, beneath the ancient branches, someone was watching him. A figure stood in the darkness, motionless, his presence heavy like the weight of an unseen force. Mosi's breath caught. Elder Zuberi, the oldest, most respected elder of the village. The man who carried the wisdom of generations, whose words shaped the fate of Mji Wambinguni. His deep-set eyes, reflecting the glow of the moon, locked on Mosi's wings, exposed, undeniable. His expression was unreadable, neither shock nor anger, but something deeper, something that made Mosi's stomach tighten. The wind that had once lifted him now felt colder. Had he made a mistake? Had his moment of freedom just condemned him? Zuberi took a step forward. The night seemed too silent, the world holding its breath. Mosi swallowed hard, his wings still open. His secret no longer a secret. There was no going back now. The village stirred before the first light of dawn. The whispers had spread like wildfire, carried by the night wind, slipping through the cracks of every hut, weaving into the morning air. Mosi had wings. Some had seen him in the sky, a shadow against the moonlight, a form not of this world. Others heard the words spoken in hushed voices, fear mixing with wonder. By sunrise, the truth was undeniable. The great fire circle was lit before the day had fully broken. Flames crackled, their golden glow flickering across the gathered faces. The entire village had come. Elders, hunters, mothers with their infants pressed against their chests, children peeking from behind their fathers' legs, eyes wide with curiosity and fear. The council of elders sat in their sacred places, their expressions heavy, unreadable. At the center of it all stood Elder Zuberi, his presence as immovable as the great baobab that had watched over the village for generations. Mosi stood behind his father, his breath unsteady, his heart a storm. He could feel their eyes on him, piercing through his skin, their judgment thick in the air. His wings, now unhidden, rested against his back, the feathers twitching under the weight of silence. Then, the murmurs began. Is he a child of the gods? A woman clutched the beads around her neck, her voice trembling. Or a spirit sent to test us? Another man's voice, sharp with suspicion. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. Fear lived in the unknown, and Mosi was the unknown. His father, Jabari, stepped forward. His stance was firm, but there was something in the tightness of his jaw, the way his hands curled into fists. He had always been a man of few words, but today, words carried weight. He is my son. Jabari's voice cut through the tension, low but unwavering. Not a curse, not a test, just a boy. The villagers hesitated. Jabari was respected, a hunter who had fed many, protected many. But respect did not erase doubt. Elder Zuberi lifted a hand, and the murmurs faded. His eyes, deep as the river that carved through the land, settled on Mosi. Come forward, he said, his voice calm. Mosi hesitated. His legs felt heavy, his body resisting, but he forced himself to move. The firelight cast shadows against his skin as he stepped closer, his wings now fully visible to all. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some villagers took a step back. A child clutched his mother's leg, his small fingers digging into the fabric. Mosi braced himself for rejection, for anger, for something worse. But Elder Zuberi's gaze remained steady. Mosi, he said, the flames reflecting in his eyes. Do you know why the spirits gave you wings? The question struck him harder than any whispered doubt. Why? His breath caught in his throat. He had never asked himself that. He had spent his life hiding, fearing, longing, but never questioning. No, Mosi admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. Zuberi's gaze softened, though the weight of his words did not. Then it is time you find out. A new hush fell over the village. Not one of fear, but of anticipation. For the first time, Mosi was not just being seen. He was being heard. The elders had spoken. The decision was made. Mosi's journey would begin at dawn. Gomla Anga, the fortress of a sky, a place of legend, whispered about in the hushed voices of the elders, spoken only in the darkest hours of night when the fire crackled low. It was said to be a place where the boundary between earth and sky blurred, where the greatest mysteries of the universe were revealed. If there were answers to be found, they would be there. Mosi stood at the edge of his mother's hut, his heart pounding with the weight of the unknown. The village had judged him, but not with hatred. Not yet. The elders had chosen not to cast him out, but they had not welcomed him either. They needed answers. Answers Mosi did not yet have. Abeni stood before him, her hands trembling as she lifted a necklace of finely woven beads, their deep blues and earthy browns shimmering under the early morning light. No matter where the winds take you, you are my son, she whispered. Her fingers brushed against his cheek, lingering there, as if memorizing his face. He swallowed hard. The warmth of her touch made the weight of this journey even heavier. What if he did not return? What if the answers he found were not the ones they hoped for? Jabari, his father, said nothing as he tightened the leather strap around his waist, securing the supplies for the journey. His eyes, always steady, held something deeper today. Concern, perhaps even regret. "Stay close to us," he finally muttered. "There are dangers beyond the village that do not care for wings." Beside them, Elder Zubari nodded. "We leave now." They set out, three figures moving through the vast golden plains of the savannah, the horizon stretching endlessly before them. The air was thick with the scent of dry earth and wild grass, the wind carrying whispers from the trees. In the distance, lions stirred from their rest, their deep roars vibrating through the land. The rivers they crossed teemed with crocodiles, their yellow eyes watching just beneath the surface. Mosi moved forward, his steps steady, but something inside him twisted. His wings were no longer hidden, yet he still felt like he carried a burden. He had spent so much of his life longing to be seen, and now that he felt more alone than ever. As they approached Mount Kibo, the air changed. The heat of the savannah gave way to an icy wind, sharp and biting. Clouds coiled around the peaks, shifting like living things. The elders had told stories of this place, the mountain where the wind spoke in an ancient language, where spirits whispered their secrets through the mist. Jabari hesitated. "Few men climb this high," he muttered. "This place does not welcome all." Zubari placed a hand on his staff, his aged eyes watching the swirling mist. "We are not here by chance. The spirits will either guide us or turn us away." Mosi stepped forward. The wind tugged at his feathers, the cold seeping into his bones. Yet something in his blood pulsed. A call, a pull like the sky itself was waiting. Higher they climbed, their bodies aching from the thin air, their breath shallow. Then, just as exhaustion threatened to claim them, they saw it. A cave. Its entrance glowed with an ethereal light, as if it had been waiting for them. The walls were smooth, untouched by time, yet something ancient lingered in the air. They stepped inside, and Mosi froze. The walls were covered in paintings, figures with wings, soaring across the heavens, their arms stretched toward the stars. Their faces were solemn, their eyes filled with purpose. The colors had not faded despite the years, the blues and golds still vibrant, telling a story long forgotten. Zubari stepped forward, his fingers tracing the painted wings with reverence. "Mosi," he murmured, his voice trembling slightly, "you were not the first." Mosi's breath caught. His heart pounded. "There were others," Zubari continued. "The winged ones. They were not mistakes. They were protectors, messengers between the earth and sky." Mosi stared at the figures, his mind racing. Had he spent his whole life believing he was alone, when he was part of something greater? Mosi no longer walked with his head lowered. He had left the village as a boy burdened by fear, by doubt, by the whispers of those who did not understand him. But now, as he stepped back onto the familiar soil of Mji-Wambinguni, he carried himself differently. The wind that once felt like an invisible force pressing against him now felt like an extension of himself, a silent companion. The villagers gathered, their eyes widening as they saw him return. Not as the outcast they had questioned, but as something else entirely. His wings, no longer hidden beneath woven cloths, spread naturally at his back. There was no need for secrecy anymore. He was not a child cursed by the unknown. He was something far greater. He was one of the winged ones, the link between the past and the future. The people whispered, their voices laced with awe. Some knelt, pressing their foreheads to the earth. Others reached out, hesitantly, as if touching him would grant them a glimpse of the mysteries he had uncovered. Even those who had once feared him, those who had questioned whether he was a spirit sent to test them, stood in silent reverence. Jabari, his father, exhaled deeply, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in years. He had spent so long protecting Mosi from the world, but now he realized Mosi was meant to protect them, and soon the village would need him. The dry season came with merciless heat, the riverbed shrinking in a cracked earth, the fields withering beneath the scorching sun. The elders gathered in concern, their voices laced with worry. Water was running scarce. The herds that roamed the plains had moved farther than ever before, and the wells were no longer enough to sustain the people. But where others saw despair, Moses saw possibility. He soared, high above the village, above the plains, above the drought-stricken land. His wings carried him beyond the horizon, where no hunter, no elder, no traveler had dared to go in search of water. He felt the pull of the air currents guiding him, the instincts within him sharpening, urging him toward the unseen. And then there was a hidden lake, untouched by drought, nestled between cliffs where no one had thought to look, a source of life, waiting. He returned with the news, and the village rejoiced. The people followed his lead, carrying vessels, digging new wells, filling the empty gourds that had once seemed hopelessly dry. He had saved them, and when the raiders came, warriors from a distant land seeking to take what little remained, it was Moses who saw them first. He had risen at dawn, as he always did, the wind whispering secrets only he could hear. From high above, he saw the dust of their horses, the gleam of their spears catching the morning light. He did not hesitate. He dove through the skies, warning his people before the enemy reached their gates. The warriors of Mji, Wambinguni were ready, standing tall, prepared to defend their home. But Moses had one more advantage. When the battle began, when steel met steel, when war cries echoed through the air, he flew. He struck from above, his wings making him untouchable, his speed making him unstoppable. He was more than just a warrior. He was a force of nature, and by nightfall, the invaders had fled, leaving behind only the echoes of their defeat. No longer did the people of Mji Wambinguni whisper in fear when they spoke his name. No longer did they avert their eyes or question his existence. They called him guardian. They called him blessing. And for the first time in his life, Moses believed it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold, Ebony stood beside her son, her fingers brushing the beads at his neck, the same one she had placed there before his journey began. Her voice was soft, filled with a warmth that only a mother could give. "You were never a curse, my son," she whispered. "You were always a gift." Moses looked toward the endless sky, feeling the wind rise, feeling its call. He spread his wings, letting the air lift him, letting himself become what he was always meant to be. For he was Moses, the wing protector of Mji Wambinguni. The land was safe. The people of Mji Wambinguni flourished under the watchful eyes of their protector. The once skeptical elders now sought Moses' wisdom. The hunters followed his guidance, tracking herds through his aerial sight. The farmers looked to him to find signs of coming rain. His wings were no longer a mystery. They were a symbol of strength, a gift from the ancestors. But peace is a delicate thing. It can be shaken by the smallest whisper of change. One evening, as Moses soared above the village, he felt the air shift, an unease carried by the wind. The breeze that had always been his ally now felt heavy, thick with something unseen. It was not the coming of a storm, nor the presence of an enemy at the borders. This was something else. When he landed, Elder Zuberi was already waiting. His face, lined with the weight of time, held an expression Moses had never seen before. Not fear, not doubt, but knowledge. "You have felt it," Zuberi said, his voice low. Moses nodded. "The wind carries something different tonight." Zuberi exhaled, his gaze lifting to the sky. "There is something you must know, Moses, something we have not spoken of before." The fire crackled between them, shadows flickering against the elder's face. "You are not the first of the winged ones. This you have learned. But what you do not know is why they vanished. Why there are no others like you walking the earth." Moses' heartbeat quickened. He had assumed time had swallowed them, that their purpose had been fulfilled and their kind had faded into legend. But there was more. There had always been more. The fortress of the sky, Zuberi continued, was not just a place of wisdom. It was a place of war, The winged ones were not only protectors, they were defenders against a force that does not belong to this world. A silence stretched between them. What force? Mosi asked, his voice quieter than before. Zuberi's gaze hardened. The ones who fell from the dark sky. Mosi frowned, his wings tensing. The elder's words felt ancient, like they belonged to a past so distant that even the land had forgotten. But the wind had not. The wind had carried whispers of something beyond the stars, something hidden. The last of the winged ones fought them, but they did not return, Zuberi continued. They left this world to battle an enemy far greater than anything the land has ever known. And now, he paused, as if the words burned his tongue. I fear that enemy has returned. Mosi's breath came slow and deep. He had spent his life searching for purpose, for belonging. And now, as he stood beneath the vast sky, he realized something terrifying. He was not just the protector of Mji Wambinguni. He was the last of a forgotten army. That night, as the stars blinked cold and distant above, Mosi stood alone at the edge of the river, his reflection rippling in the dark waters. The weight of the past pressed against his chest. He had always believed his wings were meant for this world, that they connected him to the earth, to the people, to the land that had shaped him. But what if they were meant for something beyond it? A chill ran through him, not from fear, but from realization. The wind no longer whispered only of storms and rain. It carried a warning, and far beyond the horizon, something stirred. Something was coming. If you enjoyed this video, please help us grow by subscribing to this humble channel. And if you'd like to watch more videos like this, we prepared the next video especially for you. Click here to watch.